Chapter 7. The Story of St. Kitts and Thomas Warner. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth, the famous Englishman Sir Walter Raleigh visited the West Indies and America. He saw the strange lake of black pitch in Trinidad. He sought for gold in Guyana, and he tried to set up a colony on the mainland of North America. The colony, which he named Virginia, was a failure. The settlers were slain by the Red Indians. Later, during the reign of James I, another attempt was made. After many mistakes and much hardship, the colony of Virginia began to prosper. Among King James's bodyguard was a young man named Thomas Warner. He was a native of Suffolk in the east of England, but he wanted adventure in the New World. He joined an expedition which hoped to set up a colony in Guyana. It was a failure, but one of the party, an experienced seaman named Thomas Painter, told Warner that it would be much wiser to set up a colony on one of the Caribbean islands rather than on the mainland. On his way back to England, Warner visited some of the islands and decided that the one which Columbus had named St. Christopher was the most suitable for an English settlement. When he reached England in 1623, Warner at once sought help for his plan of setting up a colony on St. Christopher, now usually called St. Kitts. An English merchant named Merrifield agreed to buy a suitable ship and load her with provisions, stores, and tools. A sea captain named Jefferson was willing to sail the vessel across the Atlantic. It was decided that Warner should collect some would-be colonists, set out with them to Virginia, and then go on to St. Kitts. On hearing of their safe arrival, Jefferson would sail from England and join them at St. Kitts. Warner, together with his wife, his 13-year-old son Edward, and 14 settlers, arrived at St. Kitts at the end of January 1624. They were kindly received by the native Caribs and at once set to work to build huts, clear the ground, and plant maize for food and tobacco for export. The habit of tobacco smoking, learned from the Arawaks, had been made fashionable in Europe by Sir Walter Raleigh and other explorers. Their first crops, as well as their huts, were destroyed the following September by a hurricane. But Warner and his men did not lose courage. They repaired damages and replanted. And when Jefferson arrived in the Hopewell in March 1625, their first crop of tobacco was ready for shipment to England. Thomas Warner himself sailed for England, either on the Hopewell or on another ship, the Black Bess, shortly afterwards. He needed more colonists so that more crops could be grown. He wanted wealthy merchants to take part in his venture, and he also wished to be sure of the king's protection for the settlement. James I was now dead, but his son Charles I welcomed Warner at court and appointed him governor of the colony. There was no difficulty in getting young farmers from the eastern counties of England to emigrate. Well pleased with his success, Warner, with his recruits, returned to St. Kitts. On the same day that he arrived with his new colonists, a party of Frenchmen also landed on St. Kitts. They had sailed from France, hoping to set up a colony somewhere in the West Indies, but had been attacked by a Spanish warship. Their vessel had been badly damaged, some of their men had been killed, and others wounded. The English settlers and the Carib islanders were sorry for the Frenchmen, who had arrived in such a sad plight. They let them settle down on the island and form a little colony of their own. The Caribs had so far been quite friendly, but as the number of white settlers grew, they became alarmed. Their boys or priests may have told them that the white men were their enemies and would drive them from the island. At all events, the Caribs of St. Kitts plotted with the Caribs of other islands and prepared a surprise attack by night. The Caribs from other islands nearby were to arrive in their canoes, and the white men were to be destroyed. A Carib woman named Barbé, who had received much kindness from the settlers, heard of the plot and went to tell Warner and the French leader about it. When the Caribs came swarming over the sea in their canoes, they found the English and French ready for them. The attackers were driven off with heavy losses, but many of the settlers died from the wounds caused by poisoned arrows. Then Warner and the French leader agreed that they must increase the number of their colonists, take the whole island, and drive out the Caribs. Warner again journeyed to England and gathered together 400 new settlers. He returned with them to St. Kitts, all arriving in good health and spirits, and with a good store of provisions. About the same time, 2 ships left France with over 200 French colonists, but the ships were in bad condition and took 10 weeks on the voyage. More than half the men died at sea or as a result of the hardships of the passage. While the English colony prospered, the French settlers died off and much of their land was left uncultivated. Warner again visited England in 1629 and was knighted by King Charles. On his return to St. Kitts, he found the colony had been attacked and destroyed by the Spaniards. The Spaniards did not want to colonize the small islands themselves, but they did not intend to allow anyone else to do so. Over 600 of the colonists had been carried away captive. Some had escaped in their ships, and others had fled to the mountains. The Spaniards thought that they had made an end of St. Kitts. Even this disaster could not defeat Sir Thomas Warner. He encouraged the men who had escaped, and they set to work repairing the damage, rebuilding houses, and planting new crops. During his stay in England, Warner found that the tobacco market was overstocked, so he advised the men to plant sugar as well as tobacco. Sugar was making good prices, and in time, St. Kitts became one of the richest of the West Indian islands. The next disaster came 2 years later when another hurricane swept the island and not only destroyed houses and crops, but wrecked ships in the harbor. Some of the vessels were loaded with tobacco. This poisoned the water and killed thousands of fish. But thanks to the encouragement and help given by Warner, the colony survived. The French colony was less fortunate. It never fully recovered from the Spanish attack. Later, the French moved to Martinique and Guadeloupe. At last, in 1713, St. Kitts was recognized as a British island. Sir Thomas Warner had died in 1649, but his sons and many of his descendants have played important parts in West Indian history.